The shovel sliced the air first. A whisper of steel, followed by a heavy thud as it bit into the baked, unforgiving earth. Again. And again. A rhythm of madness under the white-hot sun. Sergeant Marcus Evans watched from the shadow of a Humvee, the sweat on his brow having nothing to do with the heat. For the third day in a row, Private Daniel Miller was digging. Not a foxhole, not a trench. This was something else. The hole was neat, rectangular, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide. A grave. Miller moved with a serene, terrifying focus. His movements fluid. His face a blank mask. The other men in the platoon gave him a wide berth. They'd mutter about shell shock, about the heat finally cracking a man open. But Evans knew better. He'd seen shell shock. This was different. This was a ritual. He walked over, the crunch of his boots on the gravel loud in the oppressive silence. Miller didn't look up. "That's enough, Miller," Evans said, his voice level. "Get some water. Get in the shade." The shovel paused mid-air. Miller's eyes, when they finally lifted, were like looking into a deep, still well. They were there, but the person behind them was somewhere far away. "It needs to be deep enough, Sergeant," Miller said, his voice a dry rasp. "For the quiet." He resumed digging. The thud of the shovel was the only reply Evans received. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was a statement of fact, as simple and absolute as the rising sun. Later that day, Captain Hayes called Evans into the makeshift command tent. "I'm getting reports your man is digging his own grave out there, Sergeant. What in the hell is going on?" Evans stood straight. "I'm not sure, sir. He's unresponsive." Unresponsive? This isn't a goddamn monastery, Evans. This is a forward operating base. His behavior is affecting morale. It's making the men nervous. I want him on the next transport to the field hospital for a psych eval. Handle it." Evans nodded. "Yes, sir." But as he walked away, a cold knot formed in his stomach. A psych eval felt too simple. It felt like putting a bandage on a wound that went clear through to the bone. That night, Evans found Miller's cot empty. A quick search of the perimeter found him, a silhouette against the moon, back at his hole. He'd made progress. It was deeper now. Almost waist-high. Evans didn't yell. He just stood there, watching the soldier who seemed determined to bury himself. He ordered 2 men to escort Miller to the medical tent, where they sedated him. The next morning, Evans decided to cross a line. He went to Miller's personal effects, a small footlocker. Inside, beneath neatly folded uniforms, was a small, worn wooden box. He hesitated for a moment, the feeling of intrusion heavy in the air, but the image of Miller's vacant eyes pushed him forward. He opened it. There were old photographs, the sepia tones faded, showing this same desolate landscape from a time before the war, before the concrete barriers and razor wire. The hills were the same, but the villages were different. And there was a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. The first entry was dated 1903. The handwriting was elegant, precise. The name on the inside cover read, "Thomas Miller, Daniel's great-grandfather." Evans sat on the edge of the cot and began to read. Thomas Miller was a geologist, sent here by an American oil company to survey the land. His early entries were filled with wonder. He wrote of the stark beauty of the desert, the scent of jasmine in the evenings, the generosity of the local people who shared what little they had. Then, a name began to appear more frequently. Anahita. He wrote of her eyes, the color of dark honey, the sound of her laughter, like wind chimes. He was falling in love. Evans felt a pang of unease. This was a private history, a world away from the dust and violence outside the tent. But he kept reading, compelled by a need to understand the grandson. Another name entered the narrative. Kasim, a local man of some standing, betrothed to Anahita since childhood. Thomas's writing grew tense. He wrote of stolen glances, of secret meetings by an old olive grove. The tone shifted from wonder to desperation. Then, one entry, scrawled and barely legible. "She is gone. They say she ran away. Kasim is stirring the village against me. They look at me with suspicion. But where could she have gone?" The following pages were filled with anguish and paranoia. Thomas wrote of being haunted, of feeling a presence in the dust storms, a whisper on the wind. Anahita had vanished without a trace. Shortly after, The journal ended. Thomas Miller had been recalled by his company, forced to flee the growing hostility. He never returned. Evans closed the journal. The air in the tent felt thick, heavy with the weight of a century-old mystery. In one, a young Thomas stood proudly beside a gnarled ancient olive tree. Evans's blood ran cold. He'd seen that tree. It was on the edge of their patrol sector, a lone survivor on a ridge overlooking a dried-up riverbed. The next day, Miller was back from the medical tent, a cocktail of tranquilizers making him placid but no less distant. Evans saw him that afternoon, staring out towards the ridge, towards the olive tree. That evening, Evans approached him, holding the journal. "Miller, Daniel, I know about Thomas. I know about Anahita." For the first time, a flicker of something broke through the calm facade. Recognition, pain. Miller reached out a trembling hand and touched the leather cover. "He told me where," he whispered, his voice cracking. "In my dreams. He shows me the place. The ground remembers. Sergeant, it always remembers. It's a debt. My debt." "What debt, son?" Evans asked, his voice gentle. "He buried her there," Miller said, his eyes locking with Evans's. "In his rage, in his jealousy, he took her from the world, and the lie blamed an innocent man, Kasim. They stoned him for a crime he didn't commit, a sin buried in the earth. My blood, my sin." Evans felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't just combat stress. This was a ghost story, passed down through the bloodline, a psychological inheritance of guilt so profound it had driven a young soldier to dig a grave for a woman he'd never met, 100 years after her death. The graves he had been digging were practice, test pits. He wasn't trying to bury himself, he was trying to find her. Before Evans could process it all, the perimeter alarms blared. A frantic voice crackled over the radio. "Movement to the west, near the olive grove. Multiple contacts." Evans's head snapped up. Miller was gone. He didn't have to guess where. "Ramirez, Chen with me, now," Evans yelled, grabbing his rifle. They raced out of the compound, the sounds of distant gunfire starting to pop. They found Miller on the ridge, under the twisted branches of the ancient olive tree. He was digging with his bare hands, dirt flying, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the dust and sweat. He was clawing at the earth like a man possessed. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, his words torn apart by the wind. "I'm so sorry, Anahita." "Miller, get down!" Evans screamed, as bullets whizzed past them, kicking up clouds of dirt. An ambush. The insurgents were using the ridge for cover. The squad hit the ground, returning fire, but Miller was oblivious. He was in another world, a century away, locked in his great-grandfather's sin. He kept digging, his fingers raw and bleeding. "I have to find her. I have to set it right," he screamed over the cacophony of the firefight. Evans crawled towards him, bullets thudding into the earth around them. He grabbed Miller's shoulder. "Daniel, we have to go." But just then, Miller's hands hit something hard. Not a rock, something that gave with a dull, hollow sound. Wood. He'd found it. He looked up at Evans, his eyes wide with a terrible, triumphant light. And in that moment of discovery, the world exploded around them. A rocket-propelled grenade hit the ridge 20 yards away, showering them with rock and dirt. The squad was pinned down, caught between their duty to fight and the madness unfolding with their comrade. Miller curled his body over the patch of ground, shielding it as if it were a living thing. The firefight raged. Ramirez was shouting coordinates into the radio. Chen was laying down suppressing fire. Evans looked at Miller, now completely vulnerable, and then at the box, half buried in the earth. He could drag Miller out of there, save his life, and leave the secret buried for another 100 years. Or he could see this through. He could honor the madness that, he was starting to realize, might be the sanest thing in this whole godforsaken war. During a lull in the shooting, Evans made the choice. He crawled next to Miller. "We finish this," he said, his voice firm. "Together." He unslung his entrenching tool. Ramirez and Chen glanced over, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief, but they didn't question the order in their sergeant's eyes. They adjusted their positions, providing covering fire as Evans and Miller dug. Side by side, a sergeant and a private, a soldier and a ghost hunter, they clawed at the dry earth while the battle raged around them. They unearthed a small, dark wooden chest bound in tarnished brass. As they lifted it from the ground, the enemy fire abruptly ceased. A strange, sudden silence fell over the ridge, broken only by the wind and the men's ragged breathing. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The war, for a moment, had paused. They carried the chest back to the base, the four of them moving as one. Inside the relative safety of the command tent, with the whole squad gathered around, Evans carefully pried open the lid, the air filled with the scent of dried herbs and old cedar. Inside, resting on a bed of faded silk, were not bones. There was a silver comb, intricately carved, a small book of poetry, its cover embossed with the name Anahita, a string of lapis lazuli beads, and at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, was a letter. Evans picked it up. The paper was fragile. He broke the seal and began to read aloud. The letter was from Thomas. It was his confession, but not to murder. "My dearest Anahita," it began, "if you are reading this, then our plan has failed, and I have failed you. I pray you made it to the coast. I pray you found the passage I arranged. Kasim was a cruel man, your family's arrangement a cage. Our love was our only escape. This box, this grave of your worldly things, was our only deception. I buried your life here so that you could start a new one. I was to follow. But this damnable war has broken out. The borders are sealed, and I am being sent home. I do not know if I will ever see you again. I live with the ghost of what I have done, not of taking your life, but of leaving Kasim to face the consequences of your disappearance. He was a brute, but he did not deserve the fate his own lies brought upon him. My greatest sin is not the lie I told the village, but the promise to you I may never be able to keep. I love you. I will search for you until my last breath." The tent was silent. Miller sank to his knees, his hands covering his face. The sobs that came from him were not of madness or guilt. They were of a profound, heartbreaking relief. The ghost that had haunted his family was not a murderer. It was a lover. The debt was not for a life taken, but for a promise broken by the tides of history. The inherited trauma was a distorted echo of a great-grandfather's unending grief and regret. Miller picked up the small book of poetry. He held it to his chest, the first clear expression Evans had seen on his face since they arrived. It was an expression of peace. The official report stated that Private Miller had suffered a temporary psychotic break due to combat stress, but had recovered after uncovering a historical artifact of personal significance. He was honorably discharged and sent home. Evans drove him to the transport plane. As Miller walked up the ramp, he turned. "Thank you, Sergeant." Evans just nodded. He watched the plane until it was a speck in the sky. He thought about the wars fought with guns, and the wars fought in the quiet chambers of the human heart. He thought about the secrets the earth keeps, and the debts that are passed down through blood, waiting for someone brave enough, or mad enough, to finally dig for the truth.